Okay.
All right, we're live. Thanks everyone for waiting around. This is kind of a last minute live stream, but we missed out on last Friday. I was actually traveling back home to here in the swamp in Washington, D.C. So I wasn't able to stream with Aaron as usual on Friday. We're now also live on Rockfin at my channel, Max Blumenthal. But yeah, here we are for another live stream at the Grayzone with award-winning Canadian journalist Aaron Mate. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm good, Max. How are you? How was your trip?
Well, we talked a little about it while I was on the road, and there was a new wrinkle in the trip, or a new element, which is that I told you I stopped in Nashville to do some sets with Jimmy Dore. Then I stopped in Dallas just to visit some old friends who had moved away from DC. And while we were there, we went to a Mexican restaurant, which happened to be right next door to Allen Premium Outlets, which was the site of the latest U.S. mass shooting. And it turned out that my friend's family was actually on their way to that mall on the day and at the time of the mass shooting. And my friend got off from work early and picked him up, just happened to pick him up and take him somewhere else. And so they missed out on a mass shooting by just a few minutes. It just kind of feels like everything's getting closer and closer. So that was kind of a disturbing element, or a disturbing footnote to the trip.
And you went to this mall?
I was like right next door to it. I passed by it several times. I was staying near it. So, and it's just a thing that's happening increasingly in Texas, because the state is flooded with handguns, and you have, a larger and larger percentage of young men who are mentally troubled, mentally disturbed, like this shooter. There's so many layers to this. We could probably spend the rest of the show on it, but I think, it's just something to quickly cover, or maybe in a few minutes cover, because it really speaks to the condition of this country as it's trying to export democracy and its values abroad. We're not in really good shape here. And I'm surrounded by handgun violence and gun violence where I am in Washington, D.C. A few months ago, I saw someone taken out of an apartment complex dead on a stretcher. I heard the shooting. Then later that night, I heard the retaliation shooting, the killing of the person who got him killed. And I'm friendly with a friend of this person who got killed. So I see that level of handgun violence. And then the mass shootings, I feel like it's, getting closer and closer. In fact, I once testified before a judge in Arizona named John Roll. I was an expert witness because the person who was being sued, who was one of these fanatical border vigilantes, I had interviewed him before, so I was actually called to testify. Judge John Roll, who I testified before, was shot in the head in a mass shooting by Jared Loughner. It was the mass shooting that Gabby Giffords was shot in, the congresswoman from Tucson, during a campaign event. He just happened to be standing next to her. So I think it's pretty obvious what one of the problems is, but it just seems like everyone's just throwing up their hands and they're not able to do anything about it. And, it's uncool to be a liberal. So, on this one, just seems pretty obvious when you flood a society with high-powered weapons, whether it's Syria, the United States, or Serbia now, which has is starting to develop a mass shooting problem. The country was destabilized by the civil war. There are many weapons there. Also, the media is filled with violent trash since the destruction of Yugoslavia. The West pumped in its violent media. It exalts violence and just cheapens life. And that's another factor here. We're not denying that there are myriad factors. The first major mass shooting of my life in Columbine, those guys were playing the first generation of shooting games, the first person shooter games, Doom and whatnot. But it's also high-powered weapons. Shootings have gone up exponentially since the assault weapon ban was lifted by George W. Bush in 2004. Just a fact. There was a 2019 NYU study that found that deaths more than tripled. Deaths more than tripled in the decade since the assault weapon ban ended. The shootings by a researcher named DiMaggio. And they define mass shootings as shootings of 4 or more people at once. The assault weapon ban was signed in 1994 by Bill Clinton, and it didn't grab guns from anyone. It didn't take away high capacity cartridges and clips, but it did ban the manufacture of them. And it had a moderate effect on reducing mass shootings. But since 2004, they have exploded. So I just don't know how you get around the fact that assault weapons are not regulated in this country at all. And that you have this crisis here that other countries increasingly are, many countries in the West are grappling with them, but it's just not at the same level. And everybody is living in fear in this country. The death toll from mass shootings went from 4.8 per year during the years of the assault weapon ban to 23.8 per year in the decade afterwards. I mean, numbers do not lie. I can show a chart of mass shootings, but you get the point. But, here's something that really speaks to where the country is at right now. American exceptionalism in one section on the FBI's website. The FBI has is promoting a new section on its website on how to survive a mass shooting. And I can tell you, for those of you watching who aren't in the United States or haven't been in the United States, when I pass through airports, I can see at the little restaurants and even vending stands in airports, there are guides for workers on what to do in the case of a mass shooting posted there. But here's the FBI's, active shooter safety resources: run, hide, fight. This is their new campaign. And they've hired like Hollywood actors. People trying to make it in Hollywood are appearing in this.
If you've clicked on it, we
All
can't
right, so
see it.
a mass shooting breaks out in a bar.
Max, if you clicked on it, we can't see it, or at least I can't see it. It's just it's frozen on the screen.
That's interesting. The video didn't come up, so my fault. I'm gonna fix that right now. All right, so the FBI has published a video featuring like Hollywood actors, a high production value video. This is it. Mass shooting is breaking out.
It improves your chances of survival.
So the actors are telling you what to do because mass shootings have become so common in the United States. They're telling you what to do.
Don't go up here.
Police, where is he?
By the bar, blue jeans, black shirt. Empty hands up, follow their instructions.
I'm in the direct line of fire if I head for either exit, but I have other options to help me survive. Guys, come on, in here. Come on. Go. Lock and barricade the door.
Both my exits are blocked by the shooter. I gotta stay hidden. I'm no victim. I'm ready for this.
Are you ready for this? Like, do you think anyone could possibly follow these instructions in a situation like that? And like, look at the terror that is being normalized.
It's applying direct pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding until we can find a tourniquet. In the meantime, turn off your phones and make a plan to defend yourself.
This is like, in PE class in high school where you learn to do CPR or something on someone who's, drowned, almost drowned. But now it's about mass shootings.
We have to fight to survive. If you control the weapon, you control the shooter. I'll go for the gun. He'll go for his arms.
I mean, this is like the face of the terrorized American civilian right now. They're not in an actual war. They're in a war against one another. And they're being told we have to fight to survive, just to go out in public.
The bartender will go for the head.
Where is he?
We got him right here.
Please, show me your hand.
Over here.
You can survive a mass shooting if you're prepared.
Wow, I feel so much better. I can survive.
Remember, run, hide, or fight. Run. Wherever you go, be aware.
So yeah, it kind of reminds me of like the anti-drug campaigns in the, Just Say No in the 1980s, but it's just like run, hide, or fight. Like children are going to have to be told that. Companies are making money selling backpacks to school children that contain bullet resistant plates. This is, and so you have a federal agency now normalizing the plague of mass shootings in the US and trying to educate citizens on a mass scale on how to survive it. That's what we have come to as an American society.
Wow, that is unbelievable. I'd never seen that before. I don't know what to say to that. But you're right, though. It does totally normalize this unique occurrence. I mean, not that mass shootings don't happen elsewhere, but as you said, in the U.S., it just seems off the charts. And the idea that will help anybody or mitigate anything, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's important to have safety videos, but to make it also, it's like it's such a slick production too. It sort of glamorizes the experience a little bit. When I've never been in a shooting incident, but the idea, as you said, the idea that could help somebody, I don't know.
Yeah, and you have the three alpha males behind the bar who are go be a hero, attack.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I'd rather do that than hide, because you just have to wait to hear the footsteps before your death.
Yeah.
But I mean, the alternative, and like a lot of people I know who fear this, are just arming up. So it's actually leading to a proliferation of guns. And when you talk about assault weapons, it's not just assault weapons. Jared Loughner used a 9mm. You can peel off a clip so fast with so many bullets with a 9mm that you can commit a mass shooting very easily. So we're talking about regulations. We're also talking about, Bowling for Columbine, the Michael Moore film that was about the plague of violence in the US, including mass shootings. In that film, Marilyn Manson, of all people, was actually pretty articulate, made a really good point, which is that the US justifies violence every day in mass media. And he referenced the bombing of Serbia, how that was justified. And look at the debate over the, raising the debt ceiling on the debt. What is no member of any party willing to cut? Especially the Republicans, who are demanding a massive cut on social spending. They won't cut the military budget. They won't touch the military budget. They will not touch the violence machine. The idea that the plague of violence here is not somehow also a result of blowback from militarism and empire and the whole history of the violent conquest of the US is ridiculous.
And meanwhile, when you're cutting social spending and you're denying people health care, you're increasing the chances that people with mental issues are not going to get help.
Yeah.
And are not going to be, found in the system and given treatment that could possibly prevent something like this. That's just, it's all a terrible cycle. By the way, in that video, the gunman didn't sound like they had a assault rifle. It was like
it's a pistol.
as a pistol, right? So even there, they're sort of watering down the experience because many of these shootings happen with assault rifles. But look, this also reminds me, it was about a year. It was during the after the Ukraine proxy war escalated with Russia's invasion. New York City put out a video about how to survive a nuclear attack. If you remember that, like it was like, so a nuclear weapon, a nuclear bomb has gone off.
Yep.
Don't ask us how, but it's again normalizing the unthinkable because of the culture of violence here in the U.S.
Well, and it also it doesn't. That's tough to search for it, but it doesn't contextualize it at all. It's just it doesn't tell you why we need to potentially prepare for nuclear fallout in that video.
So we provoked Russia, and now there's a nuclear attack. No, that doesn't.
Yeah, we're sanctioning the assassination of Russia's president with drone attacks on the Kremlin. Like, can you imagine what the U.S. would do? And we'll talk about this if there were drone attacks on the White House sponsored by Russia or China. So, do you fear going out in public? I know so many people who fear going out in public now in the United States. I mean, all the 4 fears that FDR laid out have been realized.
Maybe it's just my coastal bubble, but when I'm in the places I usually go, which is like, New York or LA, I don't. But I was thinking about how would I feel if I was in, the states where these happen more, like in Texas most recently. And recently I was in Colorado and Utah. And yeah, when I was there, actually, the thought did cross my mind, but I don't think that would deter me from going anywhere. But of course, it's a fair fear to have. How can you not fear that, given everything that's happening in this country? It's totally fair.
Yeah, a lot of people, friends of mine who I know who entertain this fear, they carry concealed weapons everywhere they go. I mean, I know those. I have friends like that, and then I have friends who are in favor of banning all handguns. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can live in fear. And, it's something that we've reached a point of complete dystopia. And then here's the nuclear preparation video. I don't think this will be the last one we see. There's a public service announcement for a nuclear attack on the United States without any context.
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit, okay? So what do? There are 3 important steps that I want you to remember.
Don't ask me how, because I'm left to get into NATO expansion, ringing Russia with offensive weapons, like putting missiles in Poland and Romania, using Ukraine as a proxy, the 2014 Maidan coup, expanding NATO to Russia's borders, blah, blah, blah. So don't ask me how, because we can't talk about that right now.
Lost the volume for some reason.
Anyway,
get inside fast. Okay, that's
get inside.
You need to get in a building and move away from the windows because they're going to blow up. I mean, and so on. Well, it's interesting, that they're basically telling you can survive a nuclear attack.
Yeah, that's encouraging. I guess we should risk it then.
I heard, I don't know if you saw the pictures of John Bolton in Taiwan with an injured right arm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he injured it pleasuring himself to that video. Along with like Manhattan Project test videos. But that's where we are. We're geographically protected in some ways in the United States from the violence we cause abroad. But unless you actually want to look at this internal cauldron of bloodshed that's just pouring out everywhere in American cities. And I guess we could turn now to the bloodshed that the U.S. is sanctioning, not just in Ukraine, but inside the Russian Federation. I don't know if you want to intro that or.
No, go for it, Max.
Well, over the past month, we have seen an increase in Ukrainian orchestrated terror attacks and assassination attempts inside Russia of individuals who are supportive of the Russian war effort inside Ukraine, including individuals who have participated in the war effort or worn a Russian uniform in battle. And these include public figures, intellectuals, reporters like Vladimir Tatarsky. And more recently, we saw an attempt to kill a writer inside Russia, a writer and activist who had participated in the Ukrainian in the military campaign with a car bomb. He survived. But most notably, we saw a drone attack on the Kremlin, which Ukraine has effectively taken credit for by issuing an honorary postage stamp celebrating that attack, just as it celebrated the suicide car bomb attack on the Kerch Bridge, connecting Crimea to the Russian Federation. And at the same and meanwhile, back in Washington, Secretary of State Tony Blinken has given the green light to these kind of attacks. Let's take a listen to these remarks by Secretary of State Tony Blinken, an obvious architect also of the Nord Stream bombing attacks, or at least a participant in it. And he's asked about the drone attack on the Kremlin, and here's what he had to say.
Illegally by Russia over the past 14 months.
Let's go back a little.
Get back the territory that's been seized to decide how it's going to defend itself.
All right, that's not
and
right.
How it's this Russian aggression, being bombed out of their homes, their apartments, and their streets, children killed, families torn apart. Well, we leave it to Ukraine to decide how it's going to defend itself and how it's going to try to get back the territory that's been seized from it illegally by Russia over the past 14 months and going back to 2014.
So he's asked specifically about an attempt to assassinate the Russian president. And he says, we leave it to Ukraine to decide how it's going to defend itself. He wasn't asked about Ukrainian battlefield tactics. He was asked about Ukrainian tactics in Moscow.
And if you keep playing it, he's asked once again, and he reiterates it there. So basically he's
back to them.
So to clarify, if Ukraine decided on its own to strike back in Russian territory, the United States would not criticize them.
Again, these are decisions for Ukraine to make about how it's going to defend itself, how it's going to get its territory back, how it's going to restore its territorial integrity and its sovereignty.
Look at his dead eyes. I mean, there's just no emotion there. He sounds like a robot, but he knows what he's doing and he knows what he's saying, and he's sending the green light.
Yep. And when he says these are decisions for Ukraine to make, that's not even true, because it's now known that when Ukraine makes targeting decisions, they seek U.S. approval first, in part because the U.S. is often providing the intelligence to do the targeting, right? So the U.S. signs off on major Ukrainian operations. That's why it was recently disclosed in the Pentagon leaks that the U.S. asked Ukraine not to launch attacks on Moscow on the anniversary of the invasion, and Ukraine complied. And according to the Washington Post, which is relaying what the CIA reported, Ukraine agreed to postpone the strikes, but not to abandon them permanently. So even there was a tacit agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine that Ukraine could strike inside of Russia, just not on the date that Ukraine had planned for. And the question is, was this drone incident at the Kremlin, was this one of the strikes that was postponed under an agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine? And I mean, in principle, sure. Does Ukraine have the right to strike a country that's invading it? I mean, I think it does. But does the U.S. have a say in this? And is it the U.S. obligation to do everything it can to avoid a nuclear exchange? Absolutely. And so the U.S. could, if it wanted to, use its considerable leverage to tell Ukraine not to, as it did around the anniversary of the invasion. Instead, as we just saw, Blinken gives them the green light.
Well, does it have a right to assassinate the leader of a country that it's in conflict with? I mean, is that, and does Zelensky even know about these attacks? Does he even know these attacks are being greenlit? He was in Finland at the time. I saw reports that he postponed his return to Ukraine. They're setting the stage for, remember, after the Kerch Bridge attack, that's when Russia started to escalate and attack Ukraine's electrical infrastructure. So they're opening the door for Russia to assassinate their own leadership who have been left untouched.
Yeah, and then also missing from this equation is, so what happens if Putin were assassinated? The people that would come into power in the Kremlin would be, I mean, this is just, everyone knows this, would be far more hawkish than he is. And we would be far more gloves off than he has been. Because inside the Russian political establishment, he's certainly not anywhere near at the hawkish end. Everyone knows that. So, you know, something like this would just be inviting a massive escalation by Russia.
It reminds me of the assassination attempt by drone of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in 2018 during a military parade. And that drone attack was tied back to Colombian elements and figures close to then Colombian right-wing pro-US President Ivan Duque. And, you know, right behind it, what is Colombia? It's the Israel of South America. And Ukraine plays that role in Eastern Europe. Right behind all this is the US. And again, I just don't think that we can even contemplate what the US would do in retaliation for such an attack. But after the Maduro attack, there was this neocon clown, Casey Michel, who wrote a piece for that. He was then at Think Progress. Now he's at some like neocon think tank or some spook operation. And he proposed that without any evidence that it was a false flag attack waged by the Venezuelan government on itself. And we see the same narrative. I love that all of the people who call us conspiracy theorists, the first thing they leap to whenever something inconvenient happens is they call it a false flag.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, Jack Keane on Fox News, former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta on CNN, former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, all of them immediately said that this was a false flag. And the explanations that they gave were ridiculous. Robert O'Brien, for example, said that, you know, Ukraine hasn't struck targets deep inside of Russia, which is not even true. So he doesn't even know some basic facts about what Ukraine has done. And
Robert O'Brien, by the way, is the former Trump National Security Advisor who called for bombing Taiwan's semiconductor industry if Taiwan falls into Chinese hands. In other words, the U.S. plans to destroy Taiwan's economy.
Seth Moulton, who's a Democratic member of Congress, he's called for the same thing too. So that's a good example of a bipartisan policy. But
so is the Army College of War. But let's listen to Jack Keane of the Institute for the Study of War, which recently basically invented a Ukrainian advance that was then across the Dnipro River, which was then picked up by the Wall Street Journal and every other legacy publication. And it was based on pretty much nothing. Institute for the Study of War is run by the Kagan clan.
This at the Institute for the Study of War, and we've concluded that Russia's conducting a false flag operation.
Oh, you've concluded it.
That means that they created this incident themselves. And why do we come to that conclusion? I mean, it doesn't fit Ukraine's pattern of behavior at all. First of all,
wait, what? Daria Dugina, Vladimir Tatarsky, another assassination attempt, the Kerch Bridge. And remember, all the U.S. officials were blaming Ukraine for Nord Stream just to cover their own tracks.
Well, there's little or no damage, and Ukraine would be absolutely seeking damage. Number two, I mean, hitting the top of the Senate dome appears to be well framed for filming, which it clearly was, as opposed to destruction. And thirdly, the Russians came out very quickly with this is an attack and an assassination attempt by the Ukrainians on Vladimir Putin. When it's well known, Senator Cotton is absolutely right that Putin doesn't sleep in the Kremlin. He works in the Kremlin unless there's some kind of crisis going on and he's going to stay overnight. And that was clearly not taking place here.
Okay. Perhaps. We also have the, I mean, actually less than 24 hours before that attack, or maybe 24 hours before that attack, we published this piece by Alex Rubinstein. And this is a great artwork by Alex, by the way. And it was about how a Ukrainian banker who is in the financial cartel with Igor Kolomoisky, the Ukrainian oligarch who sponsored Vladimir Zelensky's entire career, has offered a $500,000 bounty for a drone attack on the Kremlin or on Moscow on Victory Day, which is today, May 9th. Days before a failed drone assassination targeting Putin, Ukrainian banking baron Vladimir Yatsenko offered a $500,000 bounty to any weapons maker able to land a drone in Red Square during Moscow's upcoming victory parade. So, I mean, how do you square? They're incentivizing these kinds of attacks, which, as we saw in Venezuela, aren't that hard to carry out, even by independent operators. And one happened the following day. I mean, this was brilliant work by Alex, but it also foreshadowed what happened. And it obviously didn't figure into any of the analysis by the Kagan Clan's Institute for the Study of War. I mean, we had even before the attack on the Kremlin, a drone attack in the Moscow region, a separate drone attack on April 24th. And also the drone army, the Army of Drones campaign, which was announced by the Ukrainian World Congress, which was partnering with the troll farm known as NATO and Luke Skywalker. This is the campaign. This is Mark Hamill, the washed up Luke Skywalker actor. These are the drones you're looking for. And you can actually fund an army of drones to attack inside the Russian Federation through this ostensibly private initiative. Here's Mark Hamill in a address with or in an interview with, or just an engagement with Vladimir Zelensky, discussing the campaign to get drones into Russian skies. So it's just pretty clear to me that there is a context to understand how this came about, why it came about, and it's been completely whitewashed out of all of the U.S. media coverage, which is like the official story is to present it as a false flag. Blinken said he couldn't even say who carried out the drone attack.
And let me play a clip. This is Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Budanov. He's being asked by PBS whether or not he is hindered from launching strikes inside of Russia.
Or hindered by the U.S. insistence that U.S. weapons
orders.
Do you believe you're hindered by the U.S. insistence that U.S. weapons not be used to attack inside Russia?
Absolutely not. And we do not need weapons from the Americans or anyone else to get to the Russians. We have enough Ukrainian means and weapons to do this. Any purpose.
So there you go. He says, he's asked, are you hindered at all by the U.S. insistence that you not use U.S. weapons to strike inside Russia? And he says, absolutely not. We have we have the Ukrainian means to do this. So,
right.
And he's vowed strikes inside Russia before. So, assuming that this was Ukraine that did this, I wonder what the motive was. I mean, because, for example, Jack Keane saying that this doesn't look like an assassination attempt on Putin. Okay, what if they're not trying to kill Putin, but it's still a Ukrainian attack? Because there'd be other motives to do this other than trying to kill Putin. Hitting the Kremlin with a drone is a pretty powerful symbol. And I think one motive could just be simply to provoke actually a Russian reaction, because Ukraine, I think, is feeling desperate because they've been, preparing this counteroffensive, but now are having to admit that they have to tamp down expectations of that. And the U.S. is really pressuring them to show results in this counteroffensive, because the U.S. is showing that its support for Ukraine is not related to Ukraine's own self-defense needs. It's contingent on Ukraine's ability to inflict damage on Russia, because the goal is not to defend Ukraine, it's to weaken Russia. So Ukraine then trying to provoke a Russian reaction here that could justify an even bigger influx of U.S. weapons. I think that could be the motivation here, not necessarily to kill Putin. There are many motivations that Ukraine could have in doing this.
Yeah, I mean, these are psychological operations. They're aimed at making Russia's FSB will look weak, making Putin look weak. But they are also compensating for Ukraine's own weakness on the battlefield, if we're to believe even these mainstream admissions and admissions by Alexei Reznikov, the Ukrainian defense minister, or comments by them claiming that the expectations have been set too high for the probably imminent counteroffensive. And
Yep.
so maybe this is all they have to offer, is essentially terrorism. And it also highlights the culture that has been spawned by the post-Maidan government, the post-Maidan junta. I mean, before we get into that, I mean, let's put that on pause for a second, because I just want to make this point, that the culture that's been spawned by the post-Maidan junta, and we just saw the 9th anniversary of the attack on the trade union hall in Odessa that saw over 50 Ukrainians who protested the Maidan coup, who were ethnic Russians, be burned alive by Nazi gangs backed up by the Ukrainian SBU. That the culture is one that exalts violence and celebrates assassination and the elimination of the perceived enemy. It reminds me a lot of Israeli contemporary culture. And here's one more example of that. And this is the country that, okay, all countries are flawed. Okay, Ukraine has been invaded after waging a war in the east of its own against what was its own population because they were ethnically Russian. But with all that context in consideration, they are actually, through semi-official channels, polling citizens on who to assassinate inside Russia. Hours after Russian writer and activist Zakhar Prilepin, someone who did wear a Russian uniform, but who is a noted Russian writer, was nearly killed in a targeted car bomb, a popular Ukrainian news agency, Union, submitted a poll that asked its readers, who do you think should be next in the Russian pantheon of scum propagandists? This is more excellent reporting by Alex Rubinstein at the Grayzone right now. Following a car bomb intended to kill Prilepin, the outlet polled its audience on Telegram, providing a list of names of prominent Russians that could be assassinated, excluding the two reported assassination attempts on Putin. Prilepin is the third high-profile Russian to be targeted for assassination by Ukrainian agents. His maiming follows the car bombing that killed Daria Dugina, who was a noted Russian analyst and the daughter of nationalist Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. And then there was the bombing of a public event at a cafe in St. Petersburg featuring Vladimir Tatarsky, who ran a popular Telegram channel. He also wore a uniform in battle, but he was a war reporter. And they polled people. Here's the poll. Should we kill Dugin? Or they asked if Margarita Simonian, the head of RT, should be killed. They're putting all these names forward. About 50,000 people have voted in the poll while as we speak now. It's disgusting. They call, Simonian a beaver eater. They're calling for the killing of RT news hosts. And what is Union? UNIAN, it's spelled. What are they? They describe themselves as follows. As a Ukrainian information agency that partners in information dissemination and in exchange with outlets including Reuters and Bloomberg, and whose clients include the BBC and Der Spiegel. Their work gets carried and propagated by top Western outlets, and at the same time, they're engaged in this assassination fever inside Ukraine. And consider that Bellingcat's Russian director, Christo Grozev, justified on Sky News the assassination of Vladimir Tatarsky. Look at all the pro-Ukraine accounts today on Prilepin. They're all justifying it. Julia Davis and these characters who are housed at the Atlantic Council. So that kind of culture of state terror is bleeding back into Washington in the same way that supporters of Israel justify bombings like the one that took place yesterday that claimed the lives of an entire family in order to assassinate a commander of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And that's the culture that this war is encouraging inside the United States. And they say it's for democracy. No, this is not about democracy. It's about it's about weakening Russia by any means. And if any means, Aaron, means a counteroffensive in which tens of thousands of more Ukrainians are killed, thrown into this slaughterhouse with nothing achieved, well, they're being pushed to do it anyway by their bosses in Washington. And they're even admitting, as you were about to say, that it may not live up to the hype, like it's a film, like it's a Hollywood film, or like it's, it's like a first person shooter game.
I mean, the headline just totally reveals the contempt that the U.S. has for Ukrainian lives, as if a battle that could cost so many more lives is just, it's hype. It's like a box office movie, as if that's the only consequence here is whether or not it will meet U.S. expectations. And it's obvious. I mean, you read all these stories like this, and there's a similar one in the Times, and all of them basically say that U.S. support is basically contingent on Ukraine being able to show results.
Yep.
It's not related to Ukraine's self-defense needs. It's on Ukraine's ability to show results. I mean, Senator Jack Reed, is that his name? He said recently,
Armed Services Committee.
Yeah, he said it's very important because one of the reasons I think the American people are committed has been the courage and success of the Ukrainian people, and then also the recognition that they're fighting our fight. So they're being told that if you want to continue to get support in fighting our fight, you have to show results, and that means sacrificing your lives. It's just openly displayed now. It's not even hidden. Here's John Herbst. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He says, there's no question that success breeds success. If Ukraine is able to make some substantial gains, that makes it easier for people to decide to send additional aid. I thought you're in this because you want to defend Ukraine. So you shouldn't need success to make it easier to send aid. If anything, the worse Ukraine does, if you care about Ukraine's defense, that would make it easier to send even more, because obviously they need more help. He's saying no, success breeds success. So it's not about Ukraine's self-defense. It's about Ukraine's success in weakening Russia. And they don't even hide this anymore. And so many people have been bullied and duped and propagandized into believing that we're actually in this because we care about Ukraine's self-defense. And those of us who didn't go along with this, we were the ones accused of not caring about Ukrainian lives. And really, it's the exact opposite. And it's also such contempt for Ukrainian democracy, because who does the U.S. have to partner with to push all this through? It's the most extremist far-right elements of the Ukrainian state. People like that military intelligence chief, Budanov, who was openly against negotiations with Russia, and the people who have threatened Zelensky if ever he negotiates with Russia, like the former right sector leader who said that Zelensky will hang from a tree if he makes concessions with Russia. I mean, that's who the U.S. is really allied with inside of Ukraine.
Yeah, and so we have two different narratives. I don't know if they're competing narratives, but they're playing out in the most mainstream of U.S. media. One is highlighted by the headline that we just saw on screen, that it may not live up to the hype. Washington Post has a new editorial. The editorial board is basically echoing what Zelensky and Reznikov are saying. I don't know if I'm going to get blocked here. Well, here's the headline, or not. Ukraine offensive is coming. Keep your expectations in check. This is by the neocon editorial board. And basically, this is the same editorial board led by Fred Hyatt that justified the Iraq invasion, that justifies every regime change war the U.S. wants to wage. And they're just channeling the messaging from Zelensky and Kiev back to their readers. But what they're saying, their argument here is, whether or not they manage to take territory, we should keep the weapons coming. We should keep this war going indefinitely. Let's not get down, people. Let's not let the reality set in. Let's not negotiate. So that's the message, I think, the emerging message. If the counteroffensive falters, fails, or if it just simply fails to come altogether. And then you've got the Atlantic magazine, which is like where the even bigger fanatics are. And this is Caitlin Johnstone about, Bono draws Zelensky propaganda. I mean, she wrote a piece about this, but basically, if you look at the image to the left, that's the cover of the Atlantic magazine. It's supposedly drawn by Bono, but it looks like all they did was take a print of an image, a photographic image of Zelensky's face, and then Bono just drew some lines over it and wrote the choices between freedom and fear. Zelensky quote, a report from the front by Anne Applebaum and Jeffrey Goldberg. First of all, there's no way Anne Applebaum and Jeffrey Goldberg went to the front, but I don't think anything could be more cringeworthy than this. I mean, if you look at all of the Davos cringe moments of the past week or two, from Prince Charles's crowning, where he looks like the Burger King or a Crown Royal commercial, to Michelle Obama literally playing tambourine and singing backup for Bruce Springsteen, to this. I don't think you can top this. I think this is the cringe moment. And it's Jeffrey Goldberg and Anne Applebaum, and they are basically saying Ukraine can take Crimea. We need to support this. This is the fight of our time. Anne Applebaum is one of the biggest neocons in Washington, on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, confidant of Hillary Clinton. Her husband, Radek Sikorski, celebrated and thanked the U.S. after the Nord Stream bombings publicly on Twitter, then deleted his tweet. He's a former journalist himself who actually was so enthusiastic about the Mujahideen, the CIA-backed Mujahideen, that when he was covering the U.S. proxy war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Red Army, he actually picked up a gun and fought alongside them at one point. He participated in a bungled attack on Soviet barracks. And then there you got Jeffrey Goldberg. He's the editor, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He is the leading pro-Israel voice, or the most influential pro-Israel voice in the U.S. He's actually a former Israeli prison guard who confessed in his memoir to abusing a Palestinian prisoner. I don't know, do you think a Palestinian could get a rise to the top in American media after abusing a Jewish person in a prison? I don't think so. But there you have Jeffrey Goldberg and Anne Applebaum setting the tone for a stirring Ukrainian victory, or at least summoning the liberal intelligentsia to support just one more push against Russia. Just 10,000 more dead, maybe 20,000 more dead, but anything to avoid the negotiation that's needed now.
Apparently Bono, I mean, this is what they say. Bono likes to draw on his iPad doodles based on Atlantic magazine stories that he reads. And so this resulted from that, which is just,
I don't even know if that's a joke or not.
Oh, exactly. I don't know. It's just such a funny thought. And I mean, if Bono makes one contribution to humanity, it might be completely discrediting liberal celebrities in terms of their contribution to politics. And because he's just such a farce. But yeah, of course, like getting to the most discredited neocons in the country, and Applebaum and Jeffrey Goldberg, to write this piece says it all. And this is who all these so-called progressives like Bernie and the Squad who vote for the Ukraine proxy war and defer to Biden. This is who they're all in alliance with. And this, underscores how neocons have completely infiltrated and co-opted, liberal progressive politics in the US, because these are now the leading voices that we're all supposed to look up to as people of any insight on anything, when they should be the most discredited people in our whole society.
Yeah. I forgot one more moment of Davos cringe. And it was this Bernard-Henri Lévy, the French neocon who tries to position himself as a leading Jewish voice in France, trying to sell liberals on the Azov battalion. A new Masada is born in the Ukraine war, referring to the heroic Jewish fanatics who were actually a bunch of terrorists known as the Sicarii, who actually slaughtered Jews who wanted to negotiate with the Romans, and then all committed mass suicide in a Jonestown style auto massacre. But he's celebrating Masada and painting Ukraine as a new Masada led by the Azov battalion. The Azov brigade takes its inspiration from a legendary Jewish battle. Hey, they're Jewish heroes. The Nazis are Jewish heroes, according to Bernard Henri Lévy. I mean, I thought, he's scraping the depths of moral cynicism when he was celebrating jihadists in Syria and Libya. But, this really takes the cake.
My favorite picture of him is when he's visiting Libya in the aftermath of the intervention that he cheered. And you see like a close up of his feet, and he's standing on his toes so he can look as tall as possible next to the people he's posing with.
Oh no, those are with Kurds.
Oh, it was with Kurds. Okay, so that was in Syria, or
I think someone shared that with me in the replies to this. But here it is.
Yeah.
You see, he poses as a friend of the Kurds because the Kurds are backed by Israel and Syria, the Barzani gang at least.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And he doesn't want to seem shorter than them because he's a tall Western man, and these are Oriental small people, except that he actually is about the same height. I love his shirt.
I mean, what a cartoon! I mean, the shirt thing too. He always has to have his shirt unbuttoned to pretty much to the bottom. You couldn't have a more cartoonish portrayal of a Western intellectual than this guy.
It looks like a mugshot of a guy who's returning from a wedding and gets a DUI, and that's what he looks like. He was boys with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who is just one of the biggest perverts, whose career was destroyed because he basically raped the maid who is changing his sheets in his hotel room. And BHL was out there defending him because they were all, French communards who hung out together in the 60s. They used to be leftists until they all became neocons. And DSK's defense was that this woman was so attracted to him as she entered the hotel room that she voluntarily had sex with him. That was actually his defense. I mean, these are the most disgusting people on the planet, but apparently Sean Penn wasn't available to do any Atlantic illustrations. I'm looking forward to his next contribution, maybe with Jose Andres.
And I could be wrong, but maybe I'm mixing up Bernard Henri Lévy with somebody else. But recently there was a prank call with Zelensky, a prank call with some Russian pranksters posing as Zelensky, and they were speaking to someone. And it could be. Maybe it was not Bernard Henri Lévy, but it was basically that they were speaking to somebody. I believe it was the former French president who talked about having some sort of meeting with a French intellectual, and how that basically precipitated like the Maidan. And I thought it was Bernard Henri Lévy, but maybe I'm mixing up with somebody else. It was one of those prank.
No, that was Hollande. I think it was Hollande.
Yeah, but it was Hollande. But I believe he mentioned a meeting where Bernard Henri Lévy was there, but I could be misremembering.
Well, I mean, when you look at BHL and you listen to him talk, he's such an obviously pompous pseudo-intellectual fraud. It's like if a conservative who hates academics and philosophers could just create one from their own mind and 3D print a fake intellectual pompous fraud, it would be BHL. But somehow he managed to personally convince Hillary Clinton and Nicolas Sarkozy to go all in with the Libyan rebels and to make them believe that this was going to lead to an Arab Spring of democracy in Libya when it actually turned the country into a complete dystopia. I mean, of course, Hillary Clinton and Sarkozy just wanted to get the gold and destabilize the country and wreck the African Union and everything else we know. But he was the man. He was the man there who shepherded all of the opposition frauds to the offices of Clinton and Sarkozy. And in 2020, before we jump ahead to that,
I came across this headline recently from
flickers of Al
2011.
Qaeda.
So, I mean, it's just funny. Flickers of Al Qaeda and the Libya rebels. Flickers, just
Those
flickers.
flickers turned to like giant flames that consumed the city of Sirte with ISIS control. Benghazi was controlled by Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
I mean, but in 2020, BHL tried to go back to Libya, and he wasn't even allowed off the plane by Libyans. He thought he was going to be greeted as a liberator, and they called him a dog, and he had to run for his life. He also is not allowed back in Tunisia. He's hated there. He's just, you know, if you think BHL is someone, I mean, he came to Washington to promote this new film that he oversaw called Slava Ukraini, and you know, named after a Nazi collaborator chant or slogan at a Jewish temple, at a Jewish synagogue, and he was like treated with respect there. I mean, it just shows how delusional American intelligentsia is, that they actually respect him. That they think Bono is legitimate, and it's boomer liberals too. They think like Bono's cool still. They think like Bruce Springsteen is like a troubadour of the working class when he's like getting Michelle Obama to play tambourine for him. I mean, this is a guy, he sings about Tom Joad and how he wants to like kill the bankers, and then Michelle Obama's playing tambourine on stage for him. He's doing podcasts with Barack Obama. He's having dinner with Steven Spielberg and Barack Obama. That's what Obama's post-presidency is like. Ridiculous, by the way. But yeah, so this is who the counteroffensive, hype. Who's the hype for? It's for these people.
Yeah.
This is like, it provides them with libidinal satisfaction, the same way that like the PP tape and all of these phony Russiagate disclosures did. This is the movie that they're living in. These people who've never picked up a gun, never seen the face of war, never will, never seen a Ukrainian picked up in a van by military police, taken to the front and having his face blown off by an artillery shell in some destroyed town like Bakhmut. That's Ann Applebaum for you. She went to Sidwell Friends High School in DC. Her whole life has just been one giant luxury journalism vacation. And she's just cheering on a counteroffensive on the front. Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg's on the front lines. Please. Once again, the only like combat he saw was beating up a helpless Palestinian prisoner at Ketziot prison in the Negev desert in Israel. These are the most disgusting people. I mean, these people are so dangerous.
Yep.
And that's, this is the people that Tony Blinken has dinner with. Victoria Nuland, Tony Blinken. They're like all in one club. So there was an interesting tweet by David Frum. I don't know if there's anything you want to share or interject.
No. I mean, that Frum tweet fits exactly into what you're talking about.
Yeah. So there was an interesting tweet by David Frum that I responded to. Yeah. Pull it up because I'm kind of lost here.
Yeah. David Frum is commenting on RFK Jr. and he cannot believe that RFK Jr., with the views he has, is running in the Democratic primary. This is what he says. It's such a, let me zoom in. It's such a strange mix-up that Robert Kennedy Jr. is so popular with Republicans and yet decided to run in the Democratic primary instead. Just one of those screwball comedy mishaps, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I responded that, it's such a strange mix-up that David Frum was a key figure in a conservative Republican administration that destroyed Iraq and campaigned on banning abortion and same-sex marriage, and now he is the darling of the Democratic Party intelligentsia in Washington.
Yep.
And it really shows you how things have flipped. I mean, you have a wing of the Republican Party that is opposing the Ukraine proxy war, and there's absolutely no opposition from any Democrat, any elected Democrat, and RFK is exploiting that void. That's what it's about, along with the way that the Democrats and much of the left just followed the quote unquote science on the pandemic and got it wrong. But he's exploiting the fact that the Democratic Party has become the party of fear, the party of censorship, the party of war. Of course, a wing of the Republican Party is that, but there's no alternative within Democratic electoral politics to that culture that David Frum represents and that welcomes the neocon war criminal David Frum, who is like the US version of Radio Rwanda, setting the stage with propaganda for the slaughter of 1 million Iraqis.
Yeah, people have forgot that there used to be at least some little space inside the party for people like RFK Jr. and his new campaign manager, Dennis Kucinich. I mean, Kucinich was a, Democrat in the House. He was prominent. Obviously, he wasn't well liked by his colleagues, but he was there and he ran as a presidential candidate. He was on the debate stage. But things have gotten so constrained in just the last few years that now Democrats of that ilk are like not even a memory. People forget that used to at least exist on the fringe of the party. So Kennedy trying to revive that is now dismissed by the people who now really control his party, which are people like David Frum, the neocons.
Yeah. So we got attacked for saying some positive things about RFK and showing clips of his announcement speech focused on his opposition to continuing the Ukraine proxy war, his support for negotiations. And this, obviously the Democratic establishment is scared. If we can do 2 segments on this live stream and they comprise the bulk of a New Republic screed attacking all the lefties who support RFK. And basically what we said is that we think RFK is playing a positive role because he's creating space within the Democratic Party for people who had traditionally been a part of the Democratic Party base, who were anti-war, who were skeptical of their government, who were against mass surveillance, who believed in things like free speech, who opposed big pharma. And this is the there's so many like appeals for fundraising. This is the piece. Who are these supposed lefties who love Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the anti-vaxxer? You notice, by the way, whenever RFK is referred to in legacy media, like the New York Times, they refer to him as an anti-vaccine activist. That's what they reduce him to. It's just it's so nakedly contemptuous that I think anyone who isn't already completely blue-pilled by the corporate Democratic matrix will see through it. The anti-vaxxer is challenging Biden for the Democratic nomination, and some far-left media personalities are as giddy about his candidacy as Tucker Carlson is.
Because Tucker dared to interview him on a show, whereas nobody else will. And when they do, they censor him. He was recently on ABC News, and they said afterwards, by the way, we censored portions of this interview. Yeah.
That's right.
What I didn't even know about RFK Jr. is that he's called an anti-vaxxer, but really what he was is he was calling out certain ingredients of vaccines, right, and raising concerns about them, but not that he's against vaccines, but he was against certain ingredients being used. That's what I understand to be his position to be, which I didn't even know. But doing that, I guess, gets you dismissed as an anti-vaxxer. The same way that raising concerns about mandates for COVID and raising concerns about the efficacy of the vaccine and questioning whether it stops transmission, as we were told, that gets you called an anti-vaxxer too.
Yeah, the mainstream press needs to eliminate all distinctions between opposition to all vaccines and opposition to those that failed to live up to their stated promises, like the mRNA experimental vaccine introduced during COVID and which was forced on the American workforce. I recently met a guy who lost his job at an airline after 22 years because he didn't want to take it. Whatever. We know that story, but the distinction between that and opposing all vaccines
Yeah.
RFK runs Children's Health Defense. It has been critical of the lack of regulation of certain vaccines. It publishes a safe vaccination guide to help parents choose safe vaccinations for their children. There are people who follow it who would be probably qualified as what you would call like anti-vaxxers, but there are people who are just skeptical about it. And it started as an environmental publication, and it focuses also heavily on environmental factors that are harmful that aren't being regulated. RFK is known actually as an environmental lawyer. But beyond that, the substance of our discussions of RFK Jr. on this stream that are referred to by this author, David Mascriota, we'll get to him in a second, related to him criticizing the war state. And he's recently said that he believes the CIA was involved in the killing of his uncle. So he's had me on before on his podcast. He's had Scott Ritter on recently. He's had Julian Assange's family members on. This is someone who is very much in line with many people in the progressive or left-wing anti-war community in the US, or is reflecting their views. And he's trying to drive the debate within a Democratic Party that has been overtaken by the neocons. So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but I think the substance of our supportive comments about RFK Jr. relates to his ability to open up the debate on this war in Ukraine and on a future war against China, and on the war state in general, the archipelago of over 800 bases abroad.
Yeah. And I mean, this article, again, see, my problem with, acknowledging these pieces that don't contain any substance, because they don't, like, they didn't challenge a single thing we said. They just call us names, is that now more people will learn about this article than would have otherwise, because nobody reads these outlets anymore except for cognitively captured blue anon liberals.
Yeah, no one reads. Well, the TNR traditionally was like the premier voice of the neoconservative movement that still had some traction within the Democratic Party when it was under the control of Marty Peretz, who wound up just like going insane, partly over my book Goliath. But he was driven out of the New Republic, and then he moved to Israel, where he retired to a luxury apartment in a tower in Tel Aviv, where he lived with a young male Israeli soldier after basically abandoning his family. And so then some hedge funders or some tech guys bought it. Then they sold it and to some Canadian media group, or they bought it from a Canadian. I don't even know who owns it anymore. Some rad libs took it over from like the New Inquiry, and it's just
maybe a Facebook guy too. Wasn't there a Facebook guy involved?
Yeah,
anyway, it doesn't matter.
It's a garbage can.
Yeah.
But I feel like, it's still kind of a vehicle because it has that brand on it, the legacy brand. It's still sort of a valuable vehicle for carrying Democratic Party propaganda. And so the reason I thought it was worth responding is like, hey, the article promotes us. What it says about us, actually, if you're not like Clockwork Orange style lobotomized, makes us look kind of cool. So I'm happy promoting it.
What I find funny about that line, it says that we've drifted to the conspiratorial fringe in recent years.
Yeah.
What has pushed us to the so-called fringe in recent years? It's been our refusal to go along with the dumbest conspiracy theory of all time, which is that Trump was a Russian asset and was being blackmailed to do Putin's bidding. The dumbest and most dangerous conspiracy theory. So for challenging that, it's true, we have been marginalized by places that used to welcome us. That is true. But it's not because we've pushed conspiracies. It's because we've actually challenged these conspiracy theories. So really, the conspiratorial fringe is not a fringe. It's the mainstream. And we're now outside of it because we don't go along with that.
Yeah,
much like all the other crazy things that we don't go along with, the Russian bounties, Havana syndrome, Hunter Biden's laptop being a Russian operation. All those should be, in a sane society, fringe positions because they're false and they're deliberate deceptions. But instead, those are the mainstream. And so that's why we're on the fringes, because we happen to do our jobs and actually stand for facts and challenge these things.
Yeah, I mean, this section says everything you need to know about the mentality of people who are willing to go to bat for Joe Biden and hippie punch the left that criticizes his wars. It says everything because it will not address any of our critiques on the merits. There's no debate there. There's not even any mention of what our conspiracies are, what our theories are. I mean, one of the real things that separated me or got me blacklisted within the respectable left was that I said that the Syrian White Helmets are not an organization that's just there to rescue people. I mean, but it started by saying Israel's not a democracy. Again, my book Goliath got me driven out of the nation, which published that book because Eric Alterman would not stop. He wrote literally 13 attacks on me, like personal attacks, calling me a neo-Nazi in the pages of the nation. And then this year he came out with a book on Israel, which basically said what I said. So welcome to the club, Alterman. And then, you had all these rad libs and regime change, phony leftists in the Nation and Democracy Now! Who just loved all of the regime change wars in Libya and Syria, and we're not welcome there. So that's a badge of honor for me.
And speaking of the White Helmets, I don't know if you saw this, Max, but recently there was that piece in Politico by somebody who worked closely with the founder of the White Helmets, the late James LeMessurier, and his wife, Emma Weinberg. And this writer who worked closely with them and was working on a life story about James LeMessurier, said that Emma Weinberg, one of the directors of the White Helmets and who's very involved in UK government propaganda operations, that she said to her that she's former MI6, former British intelligence.
And that LeMessurier, however you say his name, was in fact a military intelligence veteran, a veteran of British military intelligence, something they always denied.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, talk about conspiracy theories. That's another one where there's become more and more evidence for. And you can read about it in places like Politico now, whereas, you could read about this in the Grayzone 4 or 5 years ago. That's always how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm keeping this on screen because I love this section so much. David Talbot, the founder of Salon, does not share Blumenthal and Mate's sympathy for war criminals like Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad. But he has endorsed Kennedy. We never endorsed Kennedy, but he has endorsed Kennedy for similar reasons, writing that, quote, neocon bureaucrats and propagandists have flocked to the Democratic Party and that Kennedy threatens those vested interests. Where is the lie? Like, where is the lie?
Yeah.
Maybe you're just one of them, or maybe you are delusional. But David Talbot, who is one of the premier historians of the CIA and of the Kennedy assassination, and who was actually my first editor when I started online journalism back in the day, back in like 2002, he was my editor at Salon. He's right. He's also one of the few kind of like boomer left liberals who kept his head throughout all these times, but he doesn't share our enthusiasm for Putin and Assad. I think, where did we say, what does it link to? The Grayzone. This is what it links to when it says sympathy for war criminals. It links to your article, your testimony at the UN about the OPCW and the Duma deception. So that is linked to as proof that you support war criminals.
That's really funny.
Unbelievable. So who before we get into like anything further, I mean, we should like, who wrote this? We should address who wrote it, because this is a guy who it looks to be our age, but he is impersonating a boomer liberal, or like someone, remember in the 70s when bald guys had long hair? like the Bee Gees, they all had like real receding hairlines, but like really long hair, or Art Garfunkel. And it was like, cool. Like that's who this guy is, but he's our age. He's a Gen Xer. I don't like mocking people's appearances if like you just can't control it. Look, I'm no Jared Leto, okay? But I mean, come on. And he's got some like cross, earring. He's trying to look like some journalistic bad boy while he's declaring that the only option is Biden. Just look at this and tell yourself 100 times there is no option but status quo Joe.
And what's funny is it speaks to what you're talking about before of like the fake populism of Bruce Springsteen, because this guy happens to have written, right, a book.
Oh yeah.
Working on a dream.
The political vision of Bruce Springsteen, who has dinner with Steven Spielberg and Barack Obama, the drone king who presided over the lowest level of black home ownership in 50 years.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Bruce, we're going to go sing a song for Tom Joad now at a fundraiser. A fundraiser for climate czar John Kerry. And then we're going to welcome on stage the Black Eyed Peas. And then here, of course, who's the other working class phony who performs at every DNC benefit? John Cougar Mellencamp and David Mascriota or Masciotra or whatever. He wrote a book called American Troubadour, Mellencamp, that looks like a Marlboro ad. What a phony. You're like in front of some like 1957 Chevy with a pompadour, looking like you're about to go beat up the Socs and the Outsiders. And you're just like a multimillionaire who sings for the Democrats. A little story about Jack and Diane. Like, how would that song inspire anyone our age to write a book? And this is the dude bashing us in the New Republic. Like, how... That's why I'm proud of this. Like, and this is great. Like, I'm looking so forward to the establishment freak out that's coming down the pike.
Well, I didn't realize that he had linked to my testimony at the UN. So I'm actually, that's great, because that's a rare time when a mainstream outlet can acknowledge the existence of the OPCW scandal. Because what most people do, who are smart and tactical or tactful, if you're working for one of these establishment outlets, is you don't acknowledge the existence of the OPCW scandal, because nobody can refute it. Nobody can refute all the findings that we have reported on that were censored. So what they do is they just pretend it doesn't exist. That's why the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, whenever they read about Duma, they don't acknowledge the existence of the inspectors who challenge the censorship of their own investigation. Because once you do that, that means people will pay attention to it and they'll realize that these inspectors, the dissenters, can't be refuted. So this guy, in linking to my testimony, I appreciate that, because that brings more attention to it. So that's great. And it's just so funny that gets treated as sympathy for war criminals, when actually we're exposing a war crime there. We're exposing whatever the original crime was, and however those people in Duma were killed, which we still don't know, but we do know there was some sort of crime. And then the other war crime of bombing Syria based on these fake allegations. So I'm glad he picked that one.
Well, in order to like ward off more attacks, I'm changing my middle name to Cougar. John Cougar Mellencamp. Like, who makes themselves puts Cougar? And then he dropped the Cougar. Why did he drop the Cougar? Because like Cougar became identified with like randy 40-something women hanging out at the Studebaker's bar during rush hour, during happy hour. Like, why? I don't know. But how do you admire that? I just can't get over it. Did you see the new polling on Biden?
I did see the new polling on Biden. I did. Not very encouraging for Biden.
No. And the way the polling's being framed, I'm not going to pull up any articles, but the way it's being framed is it's about Biden's age, and it's about Biden's lack of engagement with the press and all the Biden bloopers, him falling off his bike. And then the polling on Trump is mixed. I mean, most Americans polled think Trump should face charges for January 6th. But at the same time, over 75% of Republicans would be content with Trump as the nominee. And most Americans think that Trump is fit and able to serve as president. They don't even think Biden is fit to serve. But there's more to it, I think, and it relates to the RFK phenomenon and the Jimmy Dore phenomenon and the phenomenon of everyone mentioned in that piece who comes out of the left, who once might have found a voice in what is the respectable and now moribund, dead, ossified left of the nation and democracy now, is that so many people are so sick of this proxy war, and they're so sick of all of the phony, contrived arguments that Biden is offering for his reelection, which all relate to culture war freakouts. They're sick of the culture war. They're sick of the weird boutique sexual politics of the Democrats and the obsession with it. I mean, I'm sick of the right's obsession with it too. I don't want to hear about it, but but they're just looking for someone who summons some kind of real leadership. The Kennedy name is part of it, but it's also the substance of what he says. And so many people were afraid to say it during the pandemic and are speaking out more now about the damage the lockdowns, remote learning did to their kids, and their own fear of being essentially forcibly injected. I mean, there's just so many issues that just look at Biden's reelection ad, which is just it's a slick video he introduced to announce his reelection, his campaign for reelection. It's all about January 6th and abortion. That's and hate. It's just like Hillary Clinton's 2016 ad, love conquers hate.
Yep.
You know, so she got Lady Gaga out protesting in the streets of New York when she lost. But that's just not where most people are at right now. So I think it's about more than Biden's age. And I think war is at the center of it. The Ukraine proxy war is at the center of it. And RFK's message is resonating. And when you think, oh, it's resonating among Republicans, those are Republicans that used to be Democrats, many of them. Those are Republicans that voted for Obama, then voted for Trump in 2016, who live in places like swing districts in Michigan.
It's really interesting. You know, when Obama ran, and this is talked about in Norman Finkelstein's new book, I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. You know, when Obama, and I'm sure it's discussed elsewhere too. I just happened to read about it in Norman's book. You know, Obama pitched himself as being like the redeemer in chief, that if you vote for me, then the country is healed and racism is over, right? That was the message. So that's 2008. And then 2016, Obama betrays the working class, betrays his own base, doesn't do anything. And a lot of angry people turn to Trump, who's painting himself as this anti-establishment candidate. And a lot of Obama voters switch to Trump. All of a sudden, those same people who were deemed, you know, who were like anointed as no longer racist, healing racism, all of a sudden they're racist again because they dared to vote for Trump when all of them had voted for Obama and believed in him. And it's that kind of contempt for average people and their concerns and those who don't bow down to liberal dictates. I agree with you. I think that's driving a lot of the animus toward Biden, because that's all the Democrats have to offer now is scolding people, lecturing people, and trying to sell them on these culture war issues, much like the right has always tried that too. And I agree with you. People are sick of it.
So I don't know if RFK was forced to sign a loyalty oath. Bernie was. All Democratic candidates are forced to sign a loyalty oath saying that they will support the nominee. But we had like Simone Sanders, who was Biden's press secretary, who now has an MSNBC show because MSNBC and like the Biden administration are the same thing. She said there will be no primary process. There will be no debates.
Yeah.
So I think the next step is to actually have a debate. And no one can stop. The DNC might not want a debate, or the Presidential Debate Commission, which is essentially run by the DNC, might not allow a debate. And the DNC isn't even allowing a primary process for anyone going forward, because look at how they've moved South Carolina to the front, a state where there's a patronage system that they can easily control. But there could still be an independent debate featuring RFK and other Democratic candidates. And I think that may happen. So I just want to put this down on the record. That could happen. Anyway, go ahead.
Really gotten that much out there. I mean, and I'm starting to hear more and more talk about him. Are we going to actually have a challenge here?
I'm trying not to laugh, Joe. There's not going to be.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Do you know how many people said the same thing about Donald Trump? in 2015 on this
Yes,
show.
except I
Said
will
the
note-
same exact
Yes,
thing.
because there was going to be a Republican primary. But I really think that the mealy mouth Democrats, as I like to call them, and some of my progressive friends who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. And the reality is this: the sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to stand
So we're going to
on.
have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in the debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen major figures, primary candidates, primary sitting presidents. Ronald Reagan ran in a primary against the sitting president. Bobby Kennedy's uncle, Teddy Kennedy, ran in a primary to sitting president. So what if RFK starts polling well among the Democrats? Ralph Nader was told he could not participate in the debates against Al Gore and George W. Bush in 2000 because he wasn't polling high enough. But if you remember, Jesse Ventura, when he ran for Minnesota governor, was allowed to participate in a debate as an independent, and his polling surged. So the point is to keep them off the debate stage so their message doesn't get through. But we're living in a different time now where legacy media doesn't have as much control over what Americans see and hear. So I think the establishment freakout is going to grow, and I think something dramatic will happen with Biden. It could be Kamala Harris, who's incredibly unpopular and basically who's been disappeared, being replaced. I know like Hollywood insiders who raised tons of money for the Democrats have approached the Biden team and told them to replace her, or Biden himself gets replaced for reasons that no political professional around them can control. And RFK being there creates this really important, it's a really important wild card. So, and pay attention to the attacks from the lefties. It'll be the same professional leftists who celebrated Tucker Carlson's ouster and who wanted the US to be under perpetual lockdown, who will tail the Democrats and echo their attacks on RFK or find some left-wing angle to attack him. And then maybe they'll find some weird, freak independent that no one's heard of to support just so they can protect themselves against allegations that they're actually just supporting the Democrats. But that's what's going to happen.
And by the way, speaking of those leftists who cheered Tucker Carlson's ouster, they can join their friends in the Republican leadership who are cheering Tucker's firing, according to Axios. And the article explains it's only because of Ukraine, because Tucker Carlson was making it harder for them to drum up support for the Ukraine proxy war. So the leftists who have been cheering the firing of Tucker Carlson, the only voice on cable news to air anti-war voices, they can join their allies in the Pentagon and also inside the leadership of the Republican Party, because they are thrilled that Tucker Carlson is no longer there because he was making it difficult for them to back the Ukraine proxy war.
Yeah, he's putting so much pressure on Republican members of Congress that they couldn't defy him. And he was also putting pressure when Trump was president on the president himself to not engage in senseless attacks on Iran, for example. So that's how politics works in Washington. It doesn't work with someone who checks all your virtue signaling boutique social issue boxes doing the work. It's sometimes you get important results through an unlikely figure who is not your ally on other issues. Yeah. And there's no one on the center left who is putting any pressure on any Democrats to do anything but be in favor of more war and more censorship. Witness Mehdi Hasan's entire existence in the basement of 30 Rock. I mean, it's pathetic. Do we want to do the Syria segment, or do we want to wrap up?
We can do that. I think we should wrap it up. We can do
All
Syria on Friday. But before we go, we just wanted to express our condolences to the family of Glenn Greenwald on the passing of his husband, David Miranda. This is really sad news. This was just a day before his 38th birthday. David Miranda, who is Glenn's husband and also was a Brazilian member of Congress, passed away after being hospitalized for months with some sort of illness. And this is just it's so unspeakably sad. Here's Glenn with the announcement, and some pictures of him and David. They had 2 boys that they adopted, and I know, and were, and just, following Glenn on social media, you could see how much love there was between him and David, and how much love they have for their family. And what can you say? It's just, it's unbelievable. And David was implicated in the whole Snowden reporting, because during that, he was detained in the UK under terrorism laws for allegedly carrying some of the data containing the NSA leaks, and he very bravely fought against that, and went through a whole ordeal. Yeah. So what can you say? Just our condolences to Glenn and his family.
Yeah, David Miranda, remarkable figure, rose from the favela to a seat in the Brazilian parliament, played a key role in the Snowden leaks, was a major figure in Brazilian society, whose death has been observed by Brazilian President Lula da Silva, Edward Snowden, and we're just memorializing him here. I can't imagine what Glenn is going through, but it's a terrible loss.
All right. Well, we can wrap it there. Thanks to everybody who tuned into this and for supporting us. Go to thegrayzone.com and the Grayzone's Patreon for more. And also remember to like this stream so that more people will see it. And we'll be back at our scheduled time on Friday, I think. Right, Max?
Inshallah. And thanks for subscribing to us. Thanks for supporting us. We'll see you soon. Peace.
Peace, everybody.